I was my own brother's wife. For 40 years. Without ever knowing it. Time doesn't heal wounds like folks claim. It just teaches you how to carry the weight without breaking. Truth isn't always the key that sets you free. Sometimes it locks you in a cage you never knew existed. I've lived long enough to understand that fate has a twisted sense of humor, especially when it comes to folks who believe in pure love. At 79, looking back on the tapestry of my life, I, Victoria Harper, know. This isn't just a story. This is the raw, unvarnished truth of how destiny weaves invisible threads, turning two souls who loved each other into blood relatives, only to tear them apart for half a century before revealing the most shocking truth of all. Some secrets don't just weigh you down. They become part of your very bones, shaping every breath you take. And now, before it's too late, I have to tell it all. About Jackson. About that forbidden love that consumed us both. About the terrible truth that changed everything. And about the even more devastating revelation that came decades later. Family. Secrets are like seeds planted in fertile ground. No matter how deep you bury them, they always find a way to break through the surface. My name is Victoria Harper, but everyone called me Tori. At 79 years old, with hands that shake, from arthritis and a heart that's carried too many secrets, I've decided it's time to tell the truth. My grandchildren deserve to know who they really are, where they really come from. My Jackson, my husband for over 40 years, my companion, my soulmate, and as I discovered far too late, something even more profound and impossible than I ever imagined. I was born in a small town called Cedar Falls in rural Kentucky in 1956, when America was still finding its footing after the war, and the world seemed full of both promise and hidden dangers. Cedar Falls was the kind of place where time moved like molasses, where church bells dictated the rhythm of life, and where white picket fences hid secrets darker than a moonless night. My adoptive mother, Margaret, everyone called her Maggie, was a beautiful woman with sad eyes that always seemed to be looking at something the rest of us couldn't see. My official father, Thomas Harper, was a stern but gentle man who worked the tobacco fields and spoke more with his hands than his words. We lived in a modest but clean house with blue morning glories climbing the front porch and the smell of cornbread that escaped our kitchen every morning. In the backyard, Maggie grew tomatoes, green beans, and herbs. Plants she used for both, cooking and remedies that seemed almost magical to my young eyes. I was a curious child, always asking too many questions, always running barefoot through the dirt roads, always coming home with scraped knees and a head full of wonder. "Victoria, sit up straight and act like a lady," Maggie would scold me constantly. "Proper women don't run wild through the countryside like heathens." My childhood passed between the strict moral codes of post-war America and the secret warmth of our home. On Sundays, we attended services at Cedar Falls Baptist Church, dressed in our finest clothes, and I'd watch fascinated by the stained glass windows while Pastor Williams warned us about the dangers of sin and temptation. Coming home, Maggie would prepare fried chicken and biscuits that we all loved, and for a few precious hours, even Thomas would smile and tell stories about his time in the Pacific during the war. But there were silences. Long, heavy silences that fell over our dinner table when certain relatives were mentioned, or when someone asked about the past. There were furtive glances between my parents, hushed conversations that stopped the moment. I entered a room and Maggie's silent tears when she thought no one was watching. I'd catch her sometimes, staring out the kitchen window with a faraway look, her hands unconsciously moving to her belly as if remembering something, or someone, that was no longer there. "Some things are better left unknown, Tori," my grandmother. Evelyn would tell me when I asked too many questions about family history. "The past has teeth, child. Sometimes it's best to let sleeping dogs lie. So I learned to swallow my curiosity, to bury my questions deep in my heart, along with my dreams of someday understanding the mystery that seemed to surround my very existence. It was during the sweltering summer of my 16th year when everything changed. The heat was oppressive, making the air shimmer like water over the tobacco fields. I had developed into a young woman, and I noticed the way boys looked at me when I walked to Miller's general store for supplies. Maggie began watching me with a new intensity. "Soon you'll need to start thinking about finding a good husband," she would say while teaching me to sew. "A woman without a man is like a house without a foundation, bound to crumble." That's when the Morrisons arrived in Cedar Falls. William Morrison was a businessman from Louisville who'd bought the old Henderson property on the hill. He brought with him his wife, a quiet woman named Patricia, and their son Jackson, 1 year older than me, tall and lean with piercing green eyes that seemed to hold all the mysteries of the world. The first time I saw Jackson, he was helping his father unload furniture from a moving truck. He wore a white t-shirt that showed off his strong shoulders, and sweat glistened on his forehead in the afternoon sun. Our eyes met across the town square, and something inside me fluttered like a bird trying to escape a cage. I remember that moment with perfect clarity, because it was the first time I saw my mother turn pale as a ghost. She was standing beside me at the post office when the Morrisons drove by, and when William Morrison tipped his hat in polite greeting, Maggie grabbed my arm so tightly she left finger marks on my skin. "Don't you go near those people," she ordered, in a voice I'd never heard her use before. "They're not what they seem. There's bad blood there, child. Bad blood. But fate, or perhaps the curse that unknowingly hung over our family like a storm cloud, had other plans. Jackson began attending our church, appearing on Sunday walks, coinciding with me at the general store or the creek where I'd go to cool off during the hottest part of the day. Every accidental encounter fed an attraction that grew stronger with each passing day. One evening, while picking tomatoes in our garden at Maggie's request, Jackson appeared like an apparition by our back fence. His smile was crooked and confident, the kind that made my heart skip beats. "Vegetables picked by pretty hens must taste better," he said, leaning against the fence post with easy charm. "My mama says fresh vegetables ward off sickness," I replied, feeling heat rise to my cheeks that had nothing to do with the summer sun. "What does she say about persistent suitors?" he asked, his green eyes twinkling with mischief. "She says they're more dangerous than any sickness," I shot back, surprising myself with my boldness. That's how our secret began. We started meeting in hidden places, behind the old mill by Willow Creek, in the abandoned tobacco barn on the edge of town, by the swimming hole when I'd go there with laundry in the afternoons. They were innocent encounters at first, full of whispered conversations and barely touched hands. Jackson told me about Louisville, about the University of Kentucky where he planned to study, about the wide world beyond Cedar Falls that he would someday show me. I told him about my dreams of seeing New York City, of maybe becoming a teacher like the heroines in the books I read by lamplight. I told him about feeling like I didn't quite belong in Cedar Falls, like there was some part of me that yearned for something I couldn't name. "I'll take you to all those places," he promised, taking my hand in his for the first time. "We'll get married and see the world together, Tori. I swear it on my grandfather's grave." Meanwhile, at home, the atmosphere grew thick with tension. Maggie seemed sick with worry, and I caught her several times having heated conversations with Thomas, discussions that always ended abruptly when I appeared. The conversations were always in hushed tones, but I caught fragments, words like dangerous, and history repeating, and that family. "Why don't you want me talking to the Morrisons?" I finally dared to ask one night while helping Maggie wash dishes. Her face transformed, aging 10 years in an instant. "There are old debts," she murmured, her hands shaking as she dried a plate. Old sins that haven't been paid for. It's no place for a girl like you, Victoria. But I was no longer a girl. And the love I felt for Jackson gave me courage I'd never possessed before. We continued meeting in secret for months, building a private world of dreams and stolen kisses. Jackson gave me a silver locket with a tiny photograph of himself inside, which I hid among my most treasured possessions. I gave him a handkerchief embroidered with his initials that he swore to always keep close to his heart. It was Mrs. Patterson, the town gossip, who finally unleashed the storm. She'd seen me with Jackson by the creek and wasted no time informing Maggie. That night, our house exploded with emotion. "You don't know what you're doing," Maggie cried, tears streaming down her cheeks like raindrops on a window. "That boy is forbidden to you." Forbidden. Thomas, usually reserved, slammed his fist on the kitchen table with such force that the sugar bowl jumped. "No more walks. No more anything. You won't leave this house unless one of us is with you. And if I catch you near that boy again, I'll send you to your aunt in Cincinnati faster than you can blink." That night, locked in my room, I cried until I had no tears left. I didn't understand my parents' irrational hatred of the Morrisons, or why they wanted to destroy the first real happiness I'd ever known. But I decided I wouldn't give up without a fight. The next morning after church, I managed to slip a note to Jackson during the confusion of people leaving the service. "They want to separate us. Meet me tonight by the big oak tree in Riverside Cemetery. We need to talk." The day crawled by with unbearable slowness. Maggie watched me like a hawk, and I feigned submission while my heart pounded with anticipation for nightfall. When everyone had been asleep for what felt like hours, I waited another eternal hour before slipping out my bedroom window, using the old oak tree outside as a ladder, just as I'd done a few times before to meet Jackson. The night was dark, but full of stars that seemed to wink down at us like conspirators. I ran through the cemetery, wrapped in Thomas's old dark coat, feeling every shadow chase me. Every sound threatened to betray me. When I reached the ancient oak tree, Jackson was already there, his silhouette outlined against the weathered headstones. "My Tori," he whispered, embracing me with a desperation I'd never felt before. "My parents have forbidden me to see you, too. They say terrible things about your family, about old grudges and blood debts." "Mine too," I sobbed against his chest, breathing in the scent of soap and tobacco that always clung to him. "But they can't separate us, Jackson. They can't destroy what we have." That's when we made the decision that would change our lives forever. We would run away together. Jackson had money saved from working at his father's office. I had the few pieces of jewelry I'd inherited from my grandmother. We would elope to Louisville, where he had a cousin who would help us get started. "Tomorrow night," Jackson decided, kissing me for the first time on the lips. A kiss that tasted of salt and promises and forever. "Tomorrow at midnight, right here. Bring only what you can't live without. I'll take care of everything else." I returned home floating between terror and hope, my lips still tingling from that first kiss. But as I quietly climbed back through my window, a chill ran down my spine. Maggie was sitting on my bed in the darkness, waiting for me like a patient spider. "Victoria," she said in a voice so broken I barely recognized it. "My child, I cannot allow you to make this mistake." The moonlight illuminated her tear-streaked face, making her look ancient and defeated. In her hands, she held a wooden box I'd never seen before, worn smooth with age and handling. "There's something you need to know," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Something I should have told you long ago about your father. Your real father." The world seemed to stop spinning around me as Maggie began to speak, revealing a truth so devastating that it would change the course of my life forever. A confession that would open the door to an abyss of family secrets dating back to the darkest days of World War II. And what I heard that night, sitting on the edge of my narrow bed, with the moon spilling silver light through my window, was something that would torment me every single day for the next 40 years. Because sometimes fate weaves such cruel and intricate traps that not even the purest love can prevent the approaching tragedy. That night, sitting on the edge of my bed, with moonlight spilling through the window like spilled milk, I watched my mother transform before my eyes. She was no longer the stern, controlling woman I knew. She had become something fragile, almost transparent under the weight of secrets she'd carried for 2 decades. "Victoria," she whispered, caressing the wooden box with trembling fingers. "What I'm about to tell you should have gone to my grave. But fate is cruel and plays with us like a cat plays with wounded mice." My heart pounded so hard I was sure she could hear it, torn between the urgency of running away with Jackson and the terror my mother's words were creating in my chest. The box on her lap seemed to contain something much heavier than wood and metal. "During the war," Maggie began, her voice faltering like a candle in the wind. This town wasn't what it is now. Families were torn apart. Neighbors turned against neighbors. Blood ran through these hills like spring rain. I knew fragments of those stories. The whole county lived with invisible scars from the war, with agreed-upon silences and glances that avoided certain topics. But I never imagined our family held such dark secrets at its core. "Thomas isn't your real father," she finally said, and those words fell between us like stones dropped into a deep well. I couldn't breathe. The room seemed to tilt and spin around me as I tried to process what I'd just heard. Maggie continued, opening the box with hands that shook like autumn leaves. "I was barely 19 when the soldiers came through Cedar Falls. My family supported the Allies, of course, but we were poor, vulnerable. There was a unit stationed here for 3 months, and their commanding officer was a man named William Morrison." The name hit me like a physical blow. "Morrison," I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. She pulled out a faded photograph of a young woman I recognized as my mother, beautiful and serious, standing next to a man in military uniform, a man whose face I now recognized with horrible clarity. "This is William Morrison," she said, and the surname crashed through my consciousness like thunder. Jackson's father. He was a captain then, young and handsome and powerful. He and his men requisitioned our house, forced us to serve them, and William took notice of me. Her eyes filled with tears as her fingers traced the face of the man in the photograph. "It wasn't love, Victoria. I need you to understand that. It was survival. My father had been drafted and killed in Normandy. My mother was sick. My little brother was barely 13. William promised to protect us if I gave myself to him." The words came out in gasps, as if each one tore a piece of her soul. What choice did I have? I was a frightened girl. I accepted his protection, his gifts, his nightly visits. And when I became pregnant, I thought my life was over. The floor seemed to open beneath my feet. I understood then why I'd always felt that inexplicable emptiness, that sense that something fundamental was missing from my understanding of myself. "I'm William Morrison's daughter," I said, the words tasting like poison in my mouth. Maggie nodded slowly, each movement seeming to cause her physical pain. "When William found out about the pregnancy, he gave me money and ordered me to take care of the problem. But I couldn't do it. You were my baby, my blood." Thomas, who had loved me in silence before the war, offered to marry me, to give his name to my child. To you, Victoria. The pieces were starting to fit together like a jigsaw puzzle made of nightmares. But something still didn't make sense. But what does this have to do with Jackson? Why can't I be with him? My mother then pulled out a letter from the box, the paper yellowed and brittle with age. William Morrison married a woman from a good Louisville family shortly after the war, she said, her voice carrying an edge I'd never heard before. A woman who gave him more children. Legitimate children. The implication hung in the air between us like a poison cloud. Jackson is my brother, I finally managed to articulate, the words feeling foreign and wrong in my mouth. Your half-brother, Maggie confirmed. You share a father, though he doesn't know it. No one knows except Thomas and me. And now, you. I jumped up from the bed as if it were on fire. I wanted to scream, to run, to disappear into the night and never come back. The kisses I'd shared with Jackson, the promises we'd made, the dreams we'd built. Everything now became something monstrous, forbidden by the laws of nature itself. You're lying, I accused desperately, backing away from her as if she were a stranger. You're making this up to keep me away from him. I wish to. God, it were a lie, Maggie exclaimed, her voice breaking with anguish. When the Morrisons moved to Cedar Falls, when I saw Jackson with those same green eyes as his father, I knew it was a curse, a test from heaven for my sins. I sank to the floor, unable to stand. My mind spun with images of Jackson, our hands intertwined, the way my heart raced when he was near me. How could it be that such pure, intense love hid something so terrible? Why didn't you tell me before? I sobbed, my whole body shaking. How could you let me fall in love with him? How could I tell a child that she was the result of... Maggie couldn't finish the sentence. And then I thought it would never matter, that you'd never cross paths with them. When the Morrisons settled here, I begged Thomas to move away, but he refused. This is our home, he said. We won't run like criminals. I spent that night awake, tormented by dark thoughts, by images of Jackson that were now stained forever by this revelation. When dawn painted my room pink and gold, I had made a decision. I couldn't stay in Cedar Falls. I couldn't see Jackson knowing what I knew, nor could I explain the truth without destroying his life, too. I wrote a brief note. I can't run away with you. Please forgive me. Please don't look for me. I left it, in our secret spot under the loose stone by the oak tree in the cemetery. Then I spoke to my parents with a determination that surprised even me. I want to go to Louisville, I told them. My cousin Rebecca has invited me to stay with her. I want to study, work, start a new life away from here. Maggie, her eyes red from a sleepless night, understood immediately. Thomas, the man who had raised me as his own daughter despite everything, nodded gravely. It's for the best, he said, and in his voice there was as much pain as relief. 3 days later, with a small suitcase and a heart broken into 1,000 pieces, I boarded the Greyhound bus that would take me to Louisville. I didn't look back as we left Cedar Falls, though I felt like I was leaving the most important part of myself behind, a part I would never recover. Life in Louisville was like diving into a raging river. The city, enormous and noisy, scared and fascinated me in equal measure. My cousin Rebecca, 5 years older than me, lived in a small apartment near the University of Kentucky. She worked as a secretary at a law firm and got me hired as a filing clerk. You can start over here, she told me when I arrived with swollen eyes and a soul in pieces. Whatever you left behind in Cedar Falls doesn't matter here. But of course it mattered. Every night in the narrow bed Rebecca had set up for me in her living room, I relived my encounters with Jackson, torturing myself with memories that were now tinged with shame and guilt. I wondered if he'd found my note, if he hated me, if he'd discovered the truth on his own. I was at the Haymarket shopping for groceries when I heard a voice that made my blood run cold. Tori. Victoria Harper. I turned slowly, though I already knew who was calling my name. Jackson was there, thinner than before with shadows under his eyes, but with the same green eyes that had stolen my breath from the very first day. "Jackson," I managed to say, my whole body trembling like a leaf in a storm. "What are you doing in Louisville?" "I've been looking for you for months," he replied, his voice a mixture of relief and barely controlled anger. "You disappeared without explanation, just that cruel note." "Why, Tori? What happened between us?" People walked past us, oblivious to the drama unfolding in the middle of the produce aisle. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't respond. I wanted to lie, but the words stuck in my throat like dry bread. "I can't talk here," I finally said. "There's a diner across the street." We sat at a corner booth with 2 cups of coffee that neither of us touched. Jackson looked at me as if he wanted to memorize every detail of my face, to understand what had changed, what had driven me away. "I thought you loved me," he said without preamble. "I thought what we had was real." "It was," I replied, my voice cracking like thin ice. "On my part, it still is. But there are things you don't know, Jackson. Terrible things that make any future between us impossible." "Then tell me," he insisted, leaning forward across the small table. "Whatever it is, we can face it together. I love you enough to fight through anything." I felt like I was drowning in quicksand. How could I explain that we were siblings? How could I destroy his life, his relationship with his family, his very identity, with such a revelation? "We can't be together," I finally said, the words feeling like they were being torn from my throat. "There are barriers between us that can never be overcome." "Is it because of our families? Because of this ridiculous feud that no one will explain?" "To me?" Jackson's frustration was evident in every line of his face. "I'm not a child anymore, Tori. I can make my own decisions about who I love. It's not just the feud," I said, tears streaming down my cheeks like a spring rain. "It's something much worse than family rivalry." Jackson reached across the table and took my hand, his touch burning through me like fire. "I love you," he declared with an intensity that shattered what was left of my heart. "I came to Louisville for you. My cousin has offered me a job at his insurance company. We can stay here, away from Cedar Falls, away from whatever ghosts are haunting our families. What could I do? Tell him the truth and destroy not only his love for me, but also his relationship with his father, his very sense of who he was. Or lie to him so cruelly that he would hate me forever and never come looking for me again? Before I could decide, Jackson pulled something from his pocket. The locket he'd given me, the one I'd left behind in my desperate flight from Cedar Falls. "You left this at the oak tree with your note," he said, placing it in my palm. "I've carried it with me every day since, hoping to return it to you personally. It belongs with you, Tori, like my heart does." Something broke inside me at that moment. I couldn't keep running from the truth, no matter how devastating it was. Jackson deserved at least a partial explanation, even if it destroyed us both. "My mother told me something the night before we were supposed to run away," I began, choosing my words as carefully as I would choose steps across a minefield. "About my real father. The man who raised me, Thomas, isn't my biological father. Jackson looked at me with surprise, but not yet understanding the full magnitude of what I was revealing. My real father was a soldier who was stationed in Cedar Falls during the war. He forced my mother, and then abandoned her when he learned she was pregnant with me. Understanding began to dawn on Jackson's face like a terrible sunrise, but he still hadn't reached the devastating conclusion. That man, my biological father, was named William Morrison, I said, watching the color drain from his face. Jackson stood up so abruptly that our table shook, spilling coffee across the checkered tablecloth. "No," he said, stepping backward as if I'd struck him. "That's impossible. My father would never... He's not that kind of man. It's the truth," I insisted, feeling each word drive us further apart. "Your father is my father. We're siblings, Jackson. Half-siblings." I watched horror dawn on his face like watching someone fall off a cliff in slow motion. I saw his eyes search my features, perhaps looking for a resemblance to his father, to himself, to the family he'd never questioned. "It's a lie," he said, desperately, his voice breaking. "Your mother made it up to separate us. My father isn't the monster you're describing. Why would I lie about something like this?" I shot back, standing to face him. "Do you think this is easy for me? I love you, Jackson, more than I should. But what we feel is..." I couldn't finish the sentence. The word incest hung between us, unspoken but heavy as a tombstone. Jackson staggered toward the diner's exit like a drunk man. I ran after him, but he disappeared into the crowd on 4th Street, and I was left standing on the sidewalk with my heart in pieces and the terrible knowledge that I'd just destroyed the only person I'd ever truly loved. I returned to Rebecca's apartment devastated, unable to explain what had happened without revealing family secrets that weren't mine to tell. For weeks I lived in a state of constant agony. Every knock on the door made me jump, thinking it might be Jackson. Every tall figure on the street could be him. But he didn't come back, and I had no way of finding him. No way of knowing if he was okay, if he'd returned to Cedar Falls, or if he was still somewhere in Louisville, so close yet impossibly far. One humid July evening, when the heat was crushing the city and turning Rebecca's small apartment into an oven, she found me, crying on my bed again. "This has to stop, Tori," she said firmly but kindly. "Whoever he is, he's not worth your tears." "You don't understand," I sobbed. "It's more complicated than you could ever imagine." "Then explain it to me," she insisted, sitting beside me on the narrow bed. And I did. For the first time since arriving in Louisville, I told her the whole story. Jackson, our forbidden love, my mother's revelation, the terrible secret that bound us together and tore us apart simultaneously. Rebecca listened without interrupting, her dark eyes gradually filling with understanding and compassion. When I finished, she held me tightly. "My poor cousin," she murmured. "What a burden for such young shoulders to carry." "What should I do?" I asked, though I knew there was no easy answer. "You need to be absolutely certain," Rebecca said after a long silence. "Certain that what your mother told you is completely true. Fear makes people do strange things, Tori, and the past in small towns is full of shadows and half-truths." Her words planted a seed of doubt in my mind. What if Maggie had lied? What if she'd invented that story to keep me away from Jackson, from the Morrison family for reasons I didn't understand? How could I verify it? I asked, grasping at this fragile hope. "Your mother mentioned evidence, didn't she? Letters? Did you actually see them? Did you read them yourself?" I hadn't. I'd been so shocked by the revelation that I hadn't thought to examine the proof she claimed to have. "You need to see those letters," Rebecca said decisively. "You need..." To go back to Cedar Falls and demand the whole truth, whatever it might be. The idea of returning to my hometown terrified me. But Rebecca was right. I couldn't spend the rest of my life running from shadows, tormented by doubts and regrets. "I'll go with you," Rebecca offered. "You don't have to face this alone." 2 weeks later, we were on a bus bound for Cedar Falls. The journey was long and stifling, but every mile brought me closer to either confirmation of my worst fears or liberation from a lie that had destroyed my happiness. My return caused quite a stir in the small town. People stared and whispered as we walked down Main Street. The prodigal daughter who'd fled to the big city had returned, accompanied by a sophisticated city cousin who drew curious glances with her fashionable clothes and confident manner. Maggie burst into tears when she saw me, a mixture of joy and terror in her eyes. Thomas hugged me with silent strength, his work-hardened hands gentle on my shoulders. "You've come back," Maggie said as if she couldn't believe it. "My child has come back." "I've come for answers," I said bluntly. "I need to see those letters, Mama. I need to be absolutely certain of the truth." I saw her face go pale, but she nodded slowly. "It's only fair," she said. "You're not a child anymore. You have a right to know everything." She led me to her bedroom and retrieved the same wooden box I'd seen that fateful night. She opened it with trembling hands and extracted a small bundle of letters, tied with a faded blue ribbon. "These are William's letters," she explained. "I kept them as insurance, in case I ever needed to protect myself or protect you." I took them with shaking hands and began to read. They were brief, written in bold, authoritative handwriting. In them, William Morrison addressed my mother with possessive familiarity, giving orders disguised as requests, speaking of his obligations to his unit and his future. And then, in the last letter, dated March 1956, I found the proof I dreaded. "I've learned of your condition. I cannot allow this mistake to ruin my career and my marriage prospects. I'm sending you enough money to resolve the problem discreetly. Do not contact me again. This matter remains between us." The letter was signed WM and bore the letterhead of the military base where William Morrison had been stationed during his time in Cedar Falls. I also examined the photograph again, studying William Morrison's face with new eyes. There was something familiar in his features, the shape of his jaw, the set of his eyes that the camera had captured, features that I saw every morning in my own mirror. "It's true," I whispered, feeling the weight of certainty settle on my shoulders like a lead blanket. "It's all true." Maggie sat beside me on the bed, taking my hands in hers. "I never wanted you to suffer like this. I thought we could protect you from ever knowing that you would never have to carry this burden." "Does he know I exist?" I asked suddenly. "William Morrison, does he know I was born?" Maggie shook her head. "He believes you followed his instructions. That you were never born." Rage began to build inside me, a rage I didn't know I was capable of feeling. Rage against William Morrison for destroying my mother's life and, decades later, mine. Rage against fate for putting Jackson in my path, only to snatch him away in the cruelest possible manner. "I need to see him," I said abruptly. "I need to look into the eyes of the man who has caused so much pain." "No!" Maggie gasped in panic. "You can't do that. It's too dangerous. William Morrison is a powerful man now. He has connections, influence in Louisville business circles." "I don't care," I insisted. "I need to do this, Mama. For me, and for you too." My determination must have been evident because Maggie finally nodded with resignation. "He's in town," she said softly. He returned 2 days ago for some business at the bank. He's staying at the Morrison house with his wife." "And Jackson?" I asked, though I feared the answer. "I haven't seen him," Maggie replied. "People say the son stayed in Louisville." That same afternoon, I walked to the Morrison house, one of the grandest homes in Cedar Falls, with white columns and a wraparound porch that spoke of money and influence. My heart pounded so hard I feared it might burst as I knocked on the front door. A maid answered, looking at me with barely concealed suspicion. "What do you want?" "I need to speak with Mr. Morrison," I said with a calm I didn't feel. "Tell him that Victoria Harper wishes to see him about a personal matter." The maid hesitated but finally asked me to wait in the foyer while she delivered my message. The minutes that followed felt like hours. I studied the expensive furniture, the crystal chandelier, the oil paintings of ancestors who gazed down at me with stern disapproval. Finally, the maid returned. "The master says he doesn't know any Victoria Harper, and that he's busy with important business." "Tell him I'm Margaret Delgado's daughter," I insisted, using my mother's maiden name. "And that I've come to return something that belongs to him." The mention of Maggie's name must have struck a nerve because minutes later, the maid led me to William Morrison's study. There, sitting behind a massive mahogany desk, like a king on his throne, was the man from the photograph, now with graying, hair and deep lines etched into his face, but with those same green eyes that Jackson had inherited. The same eyes that stared back at me from every mirror. He stood as I entered, his expression cautious and something more. Recognition, perhaps. Or fear. "Who are you?" he asked without preamble, without offering me a seat or even basic courtesy. "What do you want from me?" I stood there facing my biological father, the man who had violated my mother and then abandoned her to whatever fate awaited an unmarried pregnant woman in 1940s Kentucky. The man whose blood ran through my veins, mixing with the blood of the woman he had destroyed. "My name is Victoria Harper," I said in a clear, steady voice. "I am Margaret Delgado's daughter, and I'm also your daughter." William Morrison's face went through a series of transformations. Disbelief, then horror, finally a kind of primitive fear I'd never seen on an adult's face. "Impossible," he finally managed to say. "That's impossible. Your mother, she said she had taken care of it." "My mother chose to give me life," I replied, feeling a strange calm descend over me. "Thomas Harper gave me his name and raised me as his own. I am the mistake you tried to erase, William. But here I am." He collapsed into his chair as if his legs could no longer support him. "What do you want?" he asked in a broken voice. "Money? Recognition? Revenge?" "I want you to know that I exist," I said simply, "and I want you to know what you did, not only to my mother but to me and to your son Jackson." The mention of Jackson seemed to hit him like a physical blow. "Jackson? What does my son have to do with any of this?" "We fell in love," I replied, watching understanding dawn on his face like a nightmare coming to life. "Not knowing we shared a father. Fate has a twisted sense of humor, don't you think?" William Morrison turned ashen. "My God," he murmured. "What have I done?" "That's something you'll have to ask yourself every day for the rest of your life," I replied. "I've come to leave this burden with you, where it belongs. From now on, the weight of this secret is yours to carry." I turned to leave, feeling that each step took me not only away from that man, but from a past that no longer belonged to me. "Wait," he called as I reached the door. "What happened between you and Jackson? Does he know? Does he know your siblings?" I stopped without turning around. I told him. I had to. I don't know if he believed me, but I couldn't let him live a lie. Where is he now?" William asked, and for the first time I heard something like genuine concern in his voice. "In Louisville, I think. I haven't seen him since I told him the truth. Have you ever thought about the damage your actions cause to innocent people? Have you ever considered the lives you destroy with your selfishness?" I left him there with his guilt and his secrets, walking out into the afternoon sunlight. Feeling lighter than I had in months, I had faced the monster from my family's past, and he had turned out to be just a broken old man, living with the consequences of choices made in his youth. But the question that haunted me as I walked back to my parents' house was this: what now? I had the truth, but what was I supposed to do with it? Jackson was still my half-brother. The love we'd felt was still forbidden by the laws of blood and society. Nothing had really changed, except now I carried the additional burden of having confronted the man whose actions had shaped all our lives. That evening, as I sat on the front porch with Maggie and Thomas, watching the sun set over the tobacco fields, I made another decision. I would return to Louisville, but not to hide. I would build a life for myself. A good life filled with purpose and meaning. I would honor my mother's sacrifice and Thomas's love by becoming someone worthy of their protection. And if I ever saw Jackson again, I would face that moment with the strength of someone who knew exactly who she was and where she came from, regardless of how painful that knowledge might be. The truth, as my grandmother's old Bible said, would set me free, even if freedom came with its own special kind of pain. 5 years later, I was working at Henderson & Associates law firm as a paralegal when I saw the announcement in the Louisville Courier-Journal. Local man opens insurance agency. The accompanying photograph showed Jackson Morrison, now 22, shaking hands with the mayor at the ribbon-cutting ceremony for Morrison Insurance Services. He looked older, more serious, but those green eyes were unmistakable. My heart lurched in my chest as I read the article, learning that he'd graduated from the University of Kentucky with a business degree and had decided to establish his practice in Louisville rather than return to Cedar Falls. For weeks I debated whether to seek him out. Part of me yearned to see him again, to know how he'd fared in the years since our devastating conversation at the diner. Another part of me feared opening old wounds, reviving feelings that I'd worked so hard to bury. The decision was taken out of my hands on a rainy Thursday evening in October. I was leaving the law office late, hurrying through the downpour with my coat pulled tight around me, when I collided with someone coming around the corner. We both went sprawling, my briefcase spilling papers across the wet sidewalk. "I'm so sorry," a familiar voice said, and when I looked up, there was Jackson, his green eyes wide with shock and recognition. "Tori," he breathed, helping me to my feet with gentle hands. My God, what are the odds? We stood there in the rain, 5 years of separation hanging between us like a curtain. He looked good, successful, confident, mature. There were new lines around his eyes, but they spoke of laughter rather than pain. "Hello, Jackson," I said, suddenly acutely aware of my rain-soaked hair and the mud on my skirt. "I saw the announcement about your business in the paper. Congratulations." "Thank you," he replied, still seeming stunned by our chance encounter. "I can't believe it's really you. How have you been? What are you doing in Louisville?" "I work for a law firm," I said, gesturing toward the building behind us. "Henderson & Associates. I'm a paralegal." "That's wonderful," he said, and his smile seemed genuine. "You always were the smartest person I knew." We stood there for another moment, rain dripping from our hair and clothes, before Jackson seemed to remember where we were. "Listen, there's a coffee shop around the corner. Would you like to get out of this rain? We could talk?" I hesitated. Was I strong enough for this conversation? Had enough time passed for us to speak as adults about the tragedy that had separated us? All right, I agreed. But just for a few minutes. The coffee shop was warm and dimly lit, filled with the smell of fresh bread and roasted beans. We found a quiet corner table, and for a few minutes we just sat there, studying each other across the small space, both of us trying to reconcile the people we'd become with the teenagers we'd been. You look good, Jackson said finally. Happy. Is there someone special in your life? I thought about David, the kind lawyer I'd been dating for 6 months. Nothing serious yet, but the potential for something real was there. Maybe, I said. What about you? No, he replied quickly. No one serious. He paused, then added quietly, I haven't been able to get involved with anyone since our conversation 5 years ago. My heart ached for him, for both of us. Jackson, what I told you that day was true, he interrupted. I know it was true. I did some investigating of my own after I got over the shock. You were right about everything. The admission hung between us like a weight. So, he'd confirmed our blood relationship, had learned the truth about his father's actions during the war. How had he lived with that knowledge? How did you find out? I asked softly. Jackson stared into his coffee cup as if it held answers. I confronted my father when I got back to Cedar Falls. At first he denied everything, called you a liar, a troublemaker. But I kept pushing, and eventually he broke down and admitted it all. The affair with your mother, abandoning her when she got pregnant. Everything. That must have been devastating, I said, remembering my own confrontation with William Morrison. It was, Jackson agreed. But in a strange way, it also explained so much. Why he was always so hard on me, so demanding. Why he seemed to carry such guilt. Why our family never felt quite complete. We sat in silence for a moment, both lost in our own thoughts about the man whose actions had shaped both our lives in such profound ways. Do you ever wonder, Jackson asked suddenly, what our lives would have been like if we'd never learned the truth? If we'd run away that night as we planned? It was a question I'd asked myself 1,000 times over the years. Sometimes, admitted. But then I remind myself that we would have been living a lie. Our children would have been the products of an unknowing, incestuous relationship. The truth was painful, but it was necessary. Jackson nodded slowly. You're right, of course. You always were the wise one. He looked up at me with those familiar green eyes. I want you to know something, Tori. What we felt for each other. What I felt for you. It wasn't wrong, even though we were siblings. We didn't know. We were just two young people who fell in love. But it was wrong, I said gently. Not morally, because we didn't know better, but biologically. Naturally. Some barriers exist for good reasons. I know, he said. But I don't regret loving you. I could never regret that. His words brought tears to my eyes. Nor I whispered. You were my first love, Jackson. That will never change, regardless of what we learned about ourselves. We finished our coffee and prepared to part ways, both of us knowing that this chance encounter had provided a kind of closure we'd both needed. As we stood to leave, Jackson caught my hand. Can we be friends? He asked. I know it's complicated, given our history, but we're adults now. We understand the situation. Maybe we could try to build something new, not romantic, obviously, but a connection based on who we are now, rather than who we were then. I considered his request. Was it possible for us to have any kind of relationship, knowing what we knew? Could we overcome the shadow of our shared father and the love we'd once felt for each other? I'd like that, I said finally. We're family, after all, whether we like it or not. Maybe it's time we started acting like it. And so began a new chapter in our story. Over the following months, Jackson and I carefully built a friendship based on mutual respect and shared history. We met occasionally for coffee or lunch, always in public places, always maintaining appropriate boundaries. We talked about our work, our dreams, our separate lives. I introduced him to David, the lawyer I was dating, and Jackson was gracious and kind. When Jackson started seeing a teacher named Sarah, I was genuinely happy for him. We were learning to be siblings in the truest sense, people who cared about each other's happiness without romantic complications. It wasn't always easy. Sometimes I'd catch myself looking at him and remembering the way he'd kissed me under the oak tree in Cedar Falls. Sometimes I'd see him laugh and feel an echo of the old attraction. But we were both committed to this new dynamic, both determined to honor the truth we'd learned about ourselves. 2 years after our reunion in Louisville, I married David in a small ceremony attended by close friends and family. Jackson walked me down the aisle since Thomas had passed away the previous year, and there wasn't a dry eye in the church when I kissed my brother's cheek before taking my husband's hand. Jackson married Sarah 6 months later, and I was honored to serve as one of her bridesmaids. Their children and mine would grow up as cousins, never knowing the complicated history that had brought their parents together, then apart, then together again in a completely different way. As I write this now, 40 years later, I can say with certainty that the truth did set us free. All of us. Jackson and I both built good lives with people we loved completely and honestly. Our children are successful, well-adjusted adults who know their family history and understand the importance of honesty and courage in facing difficult truths. William Morrison died in 1995, taking his secrets and his guilt to the grave. At his funeral, Jackson and I sat together in the family section, 2 of his children acknowledging our blood relationship for the first and last time in public. There were no tears, only a quiet sense of closure, and perhaps forgiveness for a man who had made terrible choices in his youth and spent the rest of his life paying for them. Maggie lived to be 92, long enough to see her grandchildren and great-grandchildren. In her final years, she often told me that saving me as a baby was the best decision she'd ever made, and that watching Jackson and me build a healthy sibling relationship was proof that love could overcome any obstacle, even the most complicated family history. The truth isn't always kind, and it isn't always liberating in the way we expect. Sometimes it's a burden we have to learn to carry with grace and dignity. But in our case, the truth, painful as it was, gave us something precious. The chance to love each other in the right way, as family should. Jackson and I are in our 70s. Now grandparents many times over, and we still meet for coffee every month. We talk about our memories of Cedar Falls, about the children we were, and the adults we became. Sometimes we even talk about that summer when we were 16 and 17, when we fell in love without knowing we were siblings. Those memories no longer bring pain. Only a bittersweet gratitude for the journey that brought us to where we are today. The truth shall set you free, the old saying goes. In our case, it set us free to love each other the right way, as brother and sister, as family, as survivors of a complicated history who chose to write their own ending. And that, I believe, is the greatest freedom of all. Epilogue. The final truth. I thought I had told you everything. I thought the story was complete, with all its pain and redemption, all its complicated truths laid bare. But life has a way of surprising you, even at 79, even when you think you've heard all the secrets your family has to tell. Was last month, while cleaning out the attic after Jackson's wife Sarah passed away, that we found the box, hidden behind old Christmas decorations and forgotten photo albums, wrapped in oilcloth and tied with twine, was a metal strongbox we'd never seen before. Inside were documents that changed everything we thought we knew about our story. The first thing we found was Maggie's real birth certificate. Not the one she'd always shown me, but her original certificate from the county courthouse. According to this document, her maiden name wasn't Delgado. It was Morrison. Margaret Morrison. My hands were shaking as I showed the certificate to Jackson. We stared at it in silence, both of us trying to process what we were seeing. "That would make your mother my father's sister," Jackson said slowly. "Which would make us cousins, not half-siblings." But there was more. Much more. At the bottom of the box was a diary, its leather cover worn smooth with age. The first entry was dated 1943, written in Maggie's careful handwriting. "My brother William came home on leave today. He looks so handsome in his uniform, but there's something different about him. Something hard that wasn't there before. The war has changed him, and not for the better. Mother says I shouldn't worry about it, that all soldiers come home different. But I see the way he looks at me now, and it frightens me. I couldn't read any further." My hands were trembling so badly that Jackson had to take the diary from me and read the rest aloud, his voice growing quieter with each entry. "William has been drinking again. He came to my room last night and I can't write what happened. I can't tell Mother. Who would believe me? He's the war hero, the golden son. I'm just his little sister. I'm late. Dear God, please let me be wrong. It's been 3 months. I can't hide it much longer. William is being transferred to some place called Cedar Falls in Kentucky. He says I should come with him. That will tell people I'm his wife's sister, visiting to help with household duties. I don't want to go, but what choice do I have? William has rented a small house on the outskirts of Cedar Falls. He tells everyone I'm a war widow, staying with his family, temporarily. The townspeople are kind to me, believing I'm grieving a dead husband. If they only knew the truth. The baby is due soon. William has been talking about adoption, about finding a good family to take the child. He says no one can ever know the truth about who the father really is. I think he's right. Some secrets are too terrible to tell. She was born on March 15th, 1956. William wanted to give her away immediately, but when I held her, when I saw her beautiful face, I couldn't do it. Thomas Harper, a good man who works for William, has offered to marry me and give the baby his name. He says he's always loved me, that he doesn't care about my past. I think this might be my only chance for a normal life. William has agreed to let me keep the baby as long as I never tell anyone the truth about her parentage. He's moving back to Louisville with his wife, and will never speak of what happened here. Thomas and I will raise Victoria as our own, and pray that she never has to know the terrible circumstances of her birth. Jackson and I sat in that dusty attic for hours, reading through decades of Maggie's private thoughts, piecing together the real truth of our family history. The man we'd both believed to be our father had actually been Maggie's brother, my uncle. My real father was Thomas Harper, the man who had raised me with such love and kindness. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. In the very last entry of the diary, dated just 2 months before Maggie's death, she had written, "Victoria and Jackson found each other again. And for a while I thought my lies had destroyed their happiness forever. But perhaps God works in mysterious ways. Perhaps some love is strong enough to survive any truth. I should tell them before I die, but I'm too much of a coward. Let them think they're siblings if it brings them peace. The real truth might be even harder to bear." Jackson looked at me across the dim attic space, and I saw my own confusion and disbelief reflected in his eyes. "If William Morrison was your mother's brother," he said slowly, "and Thomas Harper was your real father, then we're not related at all." The words hung in the air between us like a bridge spanning an impossible chasm. "All these years," I whispered. "We believed we were half-siblings. We built our entire adult relationship around that belief. We married other people, had children with them, convinced ourselves that we'd found peace with the truth. But it wasn't the truth," Jackson said. "The truth is that we were never related by blood. The love we felt as teenagers wasn't forbidden at all." I thought about David, my husband of 37 years, who had died 5 years ago. I thought about Jackson's wife, Sarah, who had just passed away. I thought about our children, our grandchildren, the lives we'd built based on what we believed to be an unshakable truth. "What do we do with this knowledge?" I asked, feeling older than my 79 years. Jackson was quiet for a long time, staring at the diary in his hands. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft but certain. "We do nothing," he said. "We're nearly 80 years old, Tori. We've both lived full, good lives. We've loved other people, raised children, built families. This knowledge doesn't change who we became or the choices we made. But we could have had a life together," I said, voicing the thought that was breaking my heart all over again. "All these years, we could have been together." "And we were together," Jackson replied, taking my hand in his weathered one. "Just not in the way we originally planned. We were together as friends, as family, as people who chose to love each other, in the way we thought was right and appropriate. He was correct, of course. He always had been the wiser one. Besides," he continued with a sad smile, "can you honestly say you regret the life you had with David? That you wish you'd never had your children with him?" I couldn't say that. David had been a wonderful husband, and our children were the light of my life. But still, the knowledge that Jackson and I could have been together, that our teenage love hadn't been forbidden after all, brought a pain I didn't know how to process. "The real question," Jackson said, "is whether we tell anyone else. Our children deserve to know their true family history." We decided to tell them together the following Sunday, when all of our children and grandchildren were gathered for a monthly family dinner. The revelation caused shock, confusion, and no small amount of anger that we'd all been living a lie for so many decades. But as the initial shock wore off, something beautiful emerged from the truth. Our families, who had always been close because of Jackson's and my friendship, now understood that they were actually connected by the love story that had started it all. The love between two teenagers in 1970s Kentucky who had been kept apart by lies and misunderstandings. My daughter, Jennifer, summed it up best. "You and Uncle Jackson were meant to be part of each other's lives, one way or another. Maybe not as husband and wife, but as something just as important, as witnesses to each other's journey." Now, as I finish writing this story, Jackson and I spend even more time together than we did before. We're the last two people alive who remember Cedar Falls as it was, who knew Maggie and Thomas and William Morrison, who lived through the pain and confusion of discovering what we thought was our true relationship. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when we're sitting on my porch watching the sunset, Jackson will take my hand, and for just a moment, I can feel the echo of what we once were. Two young people so in love, they were willing to run away together into an uncertain future. We never did get that future. But in some ways, the future we got was even better. We learned that love comes in many forms, and that sometimes the most profound connection between two people isn't romantic love at all, but something deeper. The love of souls who recognize each other across time and circumstance, and choose to remain connected no matter what life throws at them. The truth did set us free, eventually. It just took 60 years and several revelations to get there. And now, at the end of all things, I can say with absolute certainty, love always finds a way. It may not be the way you expect, it may not be the way you plan, but real love, true love, endures everything, even lies, even time, even death. Jackson and I may not have had the romance we dreamed of as teenagers, but we had something just as precious. A lifetime of choosing each other, again and again, in whatever form that choice was allowed to take. That's the real truth of our story, and it's beautiful. The end.